I was thankfully very confident from the course and the podcast at advocating for myself. And I very boldly said, "You stop, sir. I need a moment. Let me gather my thoughts before you continue." And he was very taken aback. He was like, "Whoa, no one's ever told me they need a moment." I was like, "You are dealing with a first-time mom who is in a very scary situation, and my husband is not here right now. I need a moment."
Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. This week's reviewer of the week is Amelia RP. She says, "My baby is 8 months now. She is beautiful, thriving, and wonderful. Had a water birth. Can't recommend them enough." I have to agree with you on that one. I absolutely loved mine as well. "We had to deal with a tongue tie, but as soon as that was cared for, my baby was nursing well. Please try to get a dentist on who does those procedures. It makes the biggest difference in the world." Absolutely love that. And I think that's a great idea. I would actually love to have a dentist on. So if you are listening and you have a pediatric dentist that you love, that has revised a lip tie for you, that is extremely well educated in what they do, will you reach out to us at hello@myessentialbirth.com and give us their name and number so that we can reach out to them? That would be amazing. But thank you for the review. And for those of you who are listening, if you have a chance, go write us a review. I absolutely love reading them. Now for today, we have another birth story for you guys, quickly becoming the favorites of the podcast. But without further ado, Whitni, will you take a moment and introduce yourself to everyone listening?
Of course. Thank you, Stephanie. Hey, everyone. I'm Whitni. I will save you from my last name. It's a long Polish one. I married into it. But I am a first-time mom. We gave birth in February of 2023, and it was a very unexpected, joyful pregnancy. I joked the entire way, like, if I could do pregnancy full-time as a job, I would. I loved it. I absolutely adored that pregnancy. So now I have a sweet, almost 1-year-old baby boy. His name is Hudson, who is the joy of our life. And this will air after we announce it, so I'm okay announcing. We are now 20 weeks pregnant with our second baby boy. So super excited to be a mom. I know. I'm so excited to be a mom of two under 2 and 2 little boys who hopefully will be the best of friends. So my husband and I, we live in the panhandle of Florida. We moved here 2 years ago from out west in Idaho, and we're just loving life as parents.
You and I are very similar that way. We moved from Utah, is it 2 years ago now? Year and a half ago? And we are in Florida. So you may know that. So tell me a little bit about your pregnancy then. Was it pretty straightforward? Did you have anything that stands out to you? It sounds like you absolutely loved it, which I love hearing. So
I love
tell me just
pregnant.
A little bit about your pregnancy.
So we found out really early. My cycles were very regular. We found out like the day I missed my period. I was like, it's time to take a test. And that test came back positive. The most shocking thing was being in a new city and not having my normal provider. I was like, oh, I have to find a provider. So we Googled, this is before I found your podcast. This is not the way to select a provider. I Googled and I went with who looked nice. So we went in, everything looked fine. We did the dating ultrasound around 7 weeks and baby looked healthy. We did the early blood work. Everything came back normal. All was fine. We changed providers at 21 weeks. I don't know if you want me to get into that now, but that's when the pregnancy kind of got interesting. So I just felt like a number at my provider when I was seeing her for the first couple times. I'm 4'11", really tiny frame. And
you and me.
we're twinsies, right? And
Yes, I love it.
she goes, you're going to have a C-section. And I was like, wait, what? Like, she goes, yeah, your hips, you're not going to be able to give birth. Like, there's no way. And I was really taken aback. And I'd probably listened to 2 or 3 My Essential Birth podcast episodes then, and just instantly was put on edge. I was like, don't you tell me what I can't do. Like, I have always dreamed of an unmedicated birth. Even before getting pregnant, I was like, unmedicated is where I want to be. So to hear that all of that was going to be squashed, I told my husband, I was like, I don't think I like her. And of course, my husband...
For all the right reasons. Yeah. I'm with you 100%. Yes.
my husband's like, give her another chance. Like, have a conversation. Well, I'm the type A planner. At week 9, I had my birth plan figured out. So when we went back in after the ultrasound, I went over my birth plan and she was like, no. And I told my husband, I was like, if everything looks fine at the ultrasound for the anatomy scan, we're switching. Which week 20 came and went. Our ultrasound baby boy was growing healthy. He looked great. He was measuring big. I'm doing air quotes right now because we all know that ultrasounds can be off. So glad he was growing very well, but he was big. Anyways, I actually called a midwife from a local hospital because my husband was very set on a hospital birth. I was kind of dreaming of a home birth with a midwife, and we compromised. We went with a midwife at a hospital. So we each got what we wanted. They gladly took me in. They were like, you seem like a great candidate. Come in, meet us. Let's review your blood work, and we're going to do another ultrasound, just because they didn't want to take their dating ultrasound and like the anatomy scan. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. Like, we'll do another anatomy scan if that makes you happy so that I can see the midwife. They found out that we had what's known as, I'm going to try and say this right, velamentous cord insertion. I call it VCI for short. It's kind of a scary condition, so I don't like anyone who's going through it. I've been there. I know the panic. But I'm going to try and downplay it just in case there's any moms who are listening that they don't panic either. It's a severe marginal cord insertion. So your umbilical cord isn't inserted into the placenta. It's actually into the membrane. You can be at risk for several things, which I don't want to get into. But it made it a little bit more scary for us. And instantly it was a trigger for our midwife to send us to the high risk, the MFM. Is that right? MFM doctor?
Yeah. Maternal fetal medicine.
Yeah. So they just, they were really concerned with additional fetal monitoring throughout the pregnancy, with ultrasounds, and then just kind of like limiting my movement and watching for some additional like symptoms that we might experience. So that was our biggest thing. We had the VCI, which I did, but I think every mom does. And even though your doctor says don't do it, I Googled everything. I think of course, yes. I was a My Essential Birth course student at the time, and I posted in like our Facebook group, and I was like, has anyone else experienced this? Like, is this weird? Turns out it's like less than 1% of pregnancies actually have a VCI insertion. So, cool. We're part of the elite club. I love it. I can say that now with the healthy baby boy Earthside, but it was definitely like a scary thing. I also had gestational diabetes and low iron towards the end of the pregnancy, but those were some fun things in our pregnancy we dealt with.
That sounds so fun. Thank you. I know when I saw you post that in the group, I was like, oh, yeah, that is something you don't often hear about. Did you have anyone respond in the group that said that they did have it? Okay. No, because I swore, and maybe I had talked with somebody on Instagram, but I swore I had talked with somebody recently when you had posted that about that specific problem or concern.
A lot of people posted that they had like a marginal insertion, right? Like just one that's like,
okay, that's what it was. Yeah.
Kind of weird, kind of wonky, but no one had the like true VCI. So But
Okay.
I mean, they're still very similar, and
That's
a
kinda
lot of the
crazy.
same precautions are taken, like extra monitoring, ultrasounds, all of that.
So tell me about your MFM. Did you end up liking these high risk providers that you met with, or what was that like for you?
They were both male, and I had never had a male like gynecologist or OB provider before. So it was like walking in the room, I was very shocked. I was just like, oh, you want to like, I was kind of uncomfortable with them needing to possibly get up in my lady bits.
Yeah.
And so thankfully that didn't happen. The one that we saw initially was great. He was so helpful. We had a pretty bad situation with one of them at around 30 weeks that I was thankfully very confident from the course and the podcast at advocating for myself. And I very boldly said, you stop, sir. I need a moment. Let me gather my thoughts before you continue. And he was very, he was very taken aback. He was like, whoa, no one's ever like told me they need a moment. I was like, you are dealing with a first time mom who is in a very scary situation. And my husband is not here right now. I need a moment. And he was really respectful of it. And he left the room, and the nurses brought me some tissues and a phone charger so I could call my husband. And I was like, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for the confidence to advocate for myself. Because what I had learned was like, okay, every pregnancy is so unique. How can I take what's being presented to me, digest it, quickly, and then think through it and make a decision? So like really trying to navigate away from the fear-based decision to the educated decision. And I used that with our high-risk doctors. Thankfully, I was still seeing the midwife through like all our normal care. They just had us go to him for the VCI since it wasn't their specialty.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you did get to continue on with your midwife, and you had them as your backup.
Yeah. It was weird.
Looking at all the detailed stuff.
We saw dual providers. So I saw my midwife for like all of my normal checkups, and they were still the ones who were going to deliver. It was just the monitoring was done through high risk MFM.
Okay.
So
that's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah. Highly recommend still being able to see your midwife if you have to go a high risk route.
You mentioned about your husband, and, and I can relate to this, where you're like, let's meet in the middle, midwife at a hospital, like you guys are clearly having conversations about birth and all that kind of stuff. What was it like as you guys worked through the pregnancy and even through the birth course? How was he with supporting you, or conversations that you guys had? Is there anything that like sticks out that you're like, it's so good that we were able to talk about this, or anything like that?
Like most men, he wasn't overly invested in the week by week development of the eyelashes, the fingernails, the toenails of the baby. He was like, can I feel him yet? Like how, he was more about how can I interact with baby? And that kind of translated into birth prep. I was very much like, got to do my 3 exercises every day. I am taking a weekly bath and meditating. I'm going over my birth cards. And he was like, let me know when you're pushing. And I was like, oh no, we are doing the birth course prep. And so we compromised. We did a weekly birth course date night where we would cook dinner, and then we would sit down on the couch and go through like a course together, one of the week by week sections. And some of it, I'll be honest, he was like, can you do this without me? He was like, this is not important. But once we got into the hands-on activities, what does birth look like? What is transition? How is the baby progressing through the pelvis? Like, what do contractions look like? And what is his role in contractions? He was like, game on, baby, let's do this. We did some like role play in the living room where I was like, okay, like, let's try some counter pressure, let's try some different movements. And he was really great at being like, okay, this is how I'm going to do counter pressure. Now, how can you communicate with me more, less, higher, lower, that sort of thing. And then he also took a huge interest into our birth plan, especially with being a little bit more high risk. He became very educated on the potential interventions we'd face, the side effects of some of the drugs we may be offered, like an epidural. He knew I didn't want that. So he was like, okay. He's like, what what are some alternatives to the epidural? Like, how can we make sure that you get the birth you want? So he was really supportive. It was a little bit of a challenge some weeks to be like, hey, it's our Thursday night date night. We got to do the birth course. And he's like, oh, I'm tired from work. I'm like, nope, baby could be here in 5 weeks. We got to go. So he was really supportive of it.
Well, good. And I love that you were a good boost, right? Like, let me just scoot you this way. This is what we need to do right now. That's awesome.
Yeah. We're actually reworking through the course, not like the actual videos, but I still have the workbook and just revisiting some of them. A lot of it's fresh in our mind, but I'm like, okay, like, what are some signs of labor? How does counter pressure work again? And what's our game plan now with possibly having a 1-year-old in the birthing room as well?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. Good. That's awesome. Okay. Tell me a little bit about how you prepared. So it sounds like you guys had your weekly date night. And you said you did the 3 exercises. Were there things that you did as far as nutrition, exercise, labor rehearsals, like things that you were consistent with? Any nitty gritty details that you can give about that?
Yeah. So having gestational diabetes really altered my diet plan. I felt like leading up into pregnancy, I ate pretty healthy. That changed once becoming pregnant and diagnosed with GD. The protein was the hardest aspect of it for me. I mean, I don't love protein shakes. So trying to get protein through, your actual food rather than like supplementing with shakes was really hard for me. That was my goal every day, get 100 grams of protein. I averaged around 70. I'll be honest, like that was the hardest part for me. We live in Florida, so we luckily get year-round nice weather. We went on lots of walks as a family. I did at-home like workout programs where I felt comfortable just moving my body for at least 20, 30 minutes a day. And then a lot of what I did was mental. Honestly, I built my birth playlist early. And if I was in the car driving to an appointment, driving to the grocery store, driving anywhere, I had my birth playlist going and just really like listening to those lyrics. I'm a faith-based woman, so a lot of my songs were centered around my faith and just like inviting God into that and just saying like, okay, like when I am in labor, my body's going to know what to do, but I'm not in control. Like my body will do what it's meant to do. I had some really pretty like birth affirmation cards. They were like 2 by 3 inches big. I laminated them. I would filter through them like flashcards. I had a group of like 5 or 6 that I really liked. It was like, the pain that I'm experiencing will not amount to the joy I will be experiencing soon. So it's like just those little things of really like drilling into my mind that the contractions will be temporary. The pain, if there is pain, it will be temporary. Labor is only a portion of motherhood. And so like I would go through the birth affirmations, like they were all throughout the house. I had them taped up on mirrors. They were in the deck. I would go through them. As I was eating breakfast, like I loved those things. I've already pulled them out for this pregnancy.
That's awesome.
I'm not someone who can sit down and listen to like a meditation track. So I tried to get into it. I just couldn't. My meditation came in like the quiet of whatever the day would bring, of just like really working on my breathing, 10 breaths in, 7 breaths out, or seconds, I guess, not breaths, but just how can I really get good at those now when there's not a lot of pressure, figuratively and literally, so that when in birth we're good. And I just kept going back to like the stories I had read in our Facebook group, the podcast from you, the birth course of like, your body's going to know what it needs to do. And if you can mentally prepare for the strength it's going to take, because it is a lot of strength. I mean, let's be real, moms, like pushing a baby out takes some endurance. But really my prep became with like the mental. And then I ate a pretty well-balanced diet, lots of protein. And I tried, but I managed gestational diabetes through diet so well that I definitely still enjoyed the ice cream or the cake here and there because, those sweet cravings came on.
That's great. That's great that you were able to do that. I'm curious, as you came up to those like 38 weeks, 39 weeks. And maybe I don't remember exactly when you gave birth, so you can definitely take it from here. But was there ever conversation with your provider about induction, specifically due to the velamentous cord insertion or anything, or just because of your guest date or any of that stuff? And how was that handled?
Yeah. So when we transitioned to the midwives, I actually called them out before being diagnosed with gestational diabetes. And I said, if I have gestational diabetes, will you induce me for that? And they looked at me like I was crazy. And she was like, not if you manage through diet. No, there's no reason to. And I was like, we can be friends. This is a 180 from my first provider.
Right.
Around 30 weeks, I started experiencing contractions. And they were Braxton Hicks. I mean, they were real contractions. They just weren't affecting me. Every time I would go in for an ultrasound or a non-stress test, because we had several of those, they would notice the contractions were starting to become more frequent, more intense. I actually brought the conversation up to my provider and said, based off of our VCI, I'm low on iron and my gestational diabetes. How are you comfortable letting me go till 40 weeks naturally? And at that point, she said, no concerns. Like, VCI is looking fine. You're managing through diet, and we'll get you some iron infusions to see if your levels come up. So they weren't concerned with induction at week 30. Week 36 was a different story. We had done iron infusions. I was still super anemic. Like, my levels were critically low during this pregnancy, which that's not a reason for induction on its own. So let's move on. Gestational diabetes, I killed it. That diet, I didn't spike once those last few weeks. I was so good with watching my numbers. Not a reason for induction. Now, the VCI came full circle. We had made it to about 36 weeks, which they had said early on, we may have to do a induction based on that, or a C-section based on your placenta condition. Our provider, she sat us down at 36 weeks and she said, the VCI seems to be getting worse. The blood flow to baby through the placenta, through the cord, wasn't as strong, which was really scary. So at that point, we were doing weekly ultrasounds, which sounds like a lot, but they were really concerned with making sure that he was still getting he was getting proper nutrients and he was growing. They weren't concerned with his size. They were just concerned with progress. So we revisited the scans from the last 2 weeks, and he'd grown a little bit, but it wasn't significant. So they're like, okay, let's revisit this in a couple weeks, but be prepared. We may need to go for a soft induction. Week 38, I went in. This stubborn little man was not moving on the ultrasound. They could not get him to move at all. I was actually doing jumping jacks and squats and lunges in the room. I ate a sugary snack. I think I had a piece of candy. They were get him to move. He was napping very hard. We were a little worried that he wasn't getting anything. The blood flow was super low. They pulled up his last 3 growth scans and noticed that his growth had completely plateaued. It was very weird. His head size, his belly size, leg size, nothing had changed in the last 3 weeks, which I thought was really odd that it would come back exactly the same, considering they were different scans, different ultrasound techs as well. So I was like, okay, this is a little concerning. And my midwife was like, we may want to get him out of there. He's grown enough. He's going to be fine if he comes out now. We may want to get him out so that something bad doesn't happen. Because she was very much if you want a vaginal birth as opposed to a C-section, we may need to help get him out. Otherwise, it may be too late that we're going in for a C-section. My husband and I, it wasn't the news we wanted. And we were like, okay, well, let's wait a little bit longer. Like, let's go one more appointment. The next appointment, my blood pressure was really high. And she was like, Whit, it's time. Like, she's like, I'm not going to force this on you. Maybe you'll go into labor in the next couple days, but at 39 weeks, let's schedule something. Let's just get it on the books and then you let me know. We talked it over and it just really felt right. I did not want to be the one who goes in for like an elective induction or elective C-section. I was like, no, I want my natural birth. But based off of like all the factors with the diabetes, the low iron, his placenta, my blood pressure, it was like, wow, we have a lot that could go wrong. So we ultimately decided to be induced at 39 weeks, 2 days is when we went in. And it was a really gentle induction. We'll say that. It was great. My midwife made sure that we didn't do anything that was too crazy or would hurt him or I. And she was very much like open with the entire plan the whole way.
So walk us through the induction and your birth.
Yeah. They bring you in at night and they promise you lots of sleep that we're just going to do I had Cervidil. And that's just like it's like a tampon inserter that just kind of goes in. It's super small. I was very shocked with how small it actually was. That just gets placed inside your cervix to help ripen it up. And they hook you up to all the monitoring, and they're like, get some sleep, honey. We'll be back in the morning. And of course, you're sitting there as a first-time mom ready to go into labor. And you're like, yeah, there's no way I'm getting sleep. So we went in at about 8 o'clock. By the time everything got started, it was close to 10. And the Cervidil just kind of made me feel like crampy. It felt like period cramps, honestly. I told my husband, I was like, this is weird. I feel like I'm about ready to start my period. And he was like, well, you're about ready to give birth, so there's probably a good reason for that. He was Mr. Very logical throughout this entire process. And the next morning, they removed the Cervidil, and they were like, do you want to do a cervical check? They were like, we have two options. We can do a cervix check. Hi, baby. We can do, just start you on Pitocin. We can just put in a cook cath. They're like, what do you want? And I was like, well, I kind of want to know how close my body is naturally. So I opted for a cervix check, and I was only at a 2, but I was very squishy. My cervix was very soft. So she was like, do you want to go to Pitocin right now? And I was like, I don't really want to just jump to Pitocin. So they gave me the option to try a cook catheter, which is the double ball, one side's on this side of the cervix, the other side's on the other. Not the most pleasant thing. That was a little jarring, but I just reminded myself, hey, your body's going to dilate. We got to get much bigger than this, Whitney. So if this is hurting you now, find a way to cope through this. And we did a great job at breathing through it. I was actually able to sleep from 11 to 4 with the cook catheter in. Oh, and I forgot that they put me on a very low dose of Pitocin. I opted for that because I got a little stingy. I wanted him to have his own birthday. So by this time it was February 5th. And we had some family and friends who were born on February 6th. And I was like, he's not going to share a birthday. He's either going to come today or he's going to come on the 7th. He's not sharing a birthday. So I opted for a very low dose of Pitocin just to maybe help speed up the contractions. It was on a 1. I don't know if the dosing's standard, but I was on a 1 for those 4 hours. At 4:30, I woke up from my nap and apparently missed lunchtime. So I was a little cranky that I wasn't getting lunch. And they were a little concerned with feeding me. My midwife wasn't. My midwife was like, she's fine. You can feed her. But the nurses were well, you're high risk, so we don't know if we can let you eat because you might have to go in for a C-section. my husband and I brought snacks and I ate them on the side. Don't tell anyone. Well, I guess we're telling everyone now. It's hindsight. We're fine. But 4:30, I woke up and there was this like popping sensation and like this gush of fluid coming from the inside my legs, from my lady bits. And I was like, oh, I don't really want to move. Like that felt very warm, wet, kind of sticky. So I had my husband check. I was like, can you go down there and look and see what that was? And he was like, yeah. And it was actually a lot of blood. So that was a little scary that it was bloody. I was like, that's not water breaking. Like the course taught me that the water is not bloody.
Yeah, right.
So we called the nurse in and they stopped the Pitocin. They removed the Cook catheter and they were very much anticipating it being a placenta rupture based off of our condition. So they got in there, had to do another cervix check, and the best news came. I just dilated super fast. My cervix tore a little bit because it dilated so fast. I was like, oh, okay. Not really happy that my cervix tore because it went so fast, but glad it's not the placenta. We can continue on. So they took the Cook catheter out. I was at like a 6 or a 7 centimeters then at 4:30. They kept the Pitocin super low and I was just able to move around. I actually didn't want to get in the tub, which I felt was very odd. I got in the shower for a little bit, but I wasn't into the water. I kind of wanted to sit on my ball and walk around, and I really liked curling up with my pillow and kind of just like laying there. I just was like, let me just relax. Like I'm tired.
Was your water intact then?
My water was intact then at 4:30.
Oh, that's so interesting.
At 5:15, after moving around, I peed, or so I thought. I looked over at my husband and I was like, okay, I think I just peed. But everything I know says that when I think I peed, that's probably my water. So I was like, can you look again? And sure enough, that time, I mean, a little blood was still coming out based off of my cervix, but the water broke. So my water broke, we'll call it naturally. I mean, I was on still a low dose of Pitocin and the help of the Cook cath, but they called the nurse back in. She was like, okay. I was at like an 8 then. I was dilating super fast at that point.
Yeah. Wow.
And so they were like, you're transitioning, like you're going to have a baby soon. And, my midwife was like, okay, like, she's like, your body, she's like, that little bit of Pitocin got your body kicked into gear. She was like, let's pull you off of Pitocin. Just keep doing your thing. She's like, she literally looked at me and my husband and she was like, call me when she's ready to push. She's doing okay. And so we're like, okay. Taking me off of Pitocin was a little bit of a risk because my body was relying on even that small bit to keep contractions moving. So for the next 3 hours, I stayed at roughly an 8, and it was just contraction after contraction after contraction. And I wasn't getting discouraged. I was getting really cranky because I was hungry. And about 7:30, so a couple hours later, I called my midwife in and I was like, you've got to let me eat something. I was like, I am so hungry. Like, my body is running out of fuel. And she was like, okay. So they ordered me some bone broth or some broth, which, spoiler alert, it never made it. And she was like, do you want to try it, like going back on Pitocin? You know, you've been 2 hours off. You haven't progressed at all. Your contractions are like, they're spreading out. They were really consistent with 2 to 3 minutes apart. And now they're like 25 minutes apart. She's like, do you want to try? And I was like, honestly, like, I'm ready just to, like, let's go back on a 1. I think they moved me up to like a 3. And by 8 o'clock, I was there. I was ready. for this baby to come, both mentally and physically. My body was dilated. I was at like a 9.5, and the nurse came in and she was like, okay, like, we're bringing the table in. They brought in the baby cart. They brought in the birth table, all the like clamps, the scissors, the bags, they brought in the table. And my husband came over and he looked at me and he was like, we're going to meet Hudson soon. He was like, you just got to keep going. I was like, I'm just hungry. Like, you guys are great, but like, I just want food. I was so food motivated. I felt like a dog. Like, if you would have put a biscuit in front of me, I would have done any trick you wanted. And that was like 7:38. 8:15, I remember the nurse was like, oh, honey, she's like, you're there. And I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of starting to feel like I have to poop, but not like enough. And I remember like having this conversation with my midwife, and I was like, so what's it going to be like if I do poop? Which we've had enough poop conversations on this podcast. I'll spare everyone those details. But she was like, why don't you just go to the bathroom one more time? Which I'm so glad I did. I'm glad I got in like a little tinkle before everything that's already happened. I got back in bed and just was like curling my pillow, and it was 8:34. And I know this because there's a picture. My husband was like really great at documenting the process. He took lots of pictures, lots of videos throughout. 8:34, there's a picture of me laying on the bed, like curling my pillow. And I sat up and I yelled, I have to poop or he is coming. One of the two is happening. And my midwife, bless her heart, is over there like washing her hands, getting gloved up because she knows. She's like, okay, honey. She's like, on that next contraction, she's like, you just push. She was like, I will be there in just a sec. And at 8:39, he was born, but lots happened in those 5 minutes. I was on my hands and knees pushing, which was not the best spot for me to be in. I just couldn't get leverage. Like, I couldn't get enough oomph behind the push. It was just a very awkward angle to be at for me. So the nurse helped resituate me. She put me on my right side. She was like, let's try this. She said, this is my tried and true to get you that last half centimeter. Because they still thought I was at like a 9.5. She put me onto my right side, held my leg up for me. My husband was like holding my hand, holding my hair. And the first push, they were like, holy moly, we can see head. Like, his head is right there. And I kind of laughed at him all, and I was like, I told you he was coming. Like, I gave you guys plenty of warning. Couple more pushes. They were really great at not telling me how to push or when to push, but really good at giving me the encouragement to push when I felt ready to push. Which I didn't understand until being in labor, of like what coached pushing looks like versus free pushing versus like just your own intuition. I mean, there's so many ways that I don't think I really understood it until processing afterwards. And I was like, wow, they were really supportive of just kind of like letting me push the way I wanted. Like, some contractions, I held my breath when I pushed. Some contractions, I breathed through it when I pushed. Some contractions, I grunted through the push. Like, there was so much variance in there that no one controlled how I did it. But yeah, it was perfect. The last push, they lost his heart rate, which I didn't recognize, but the nurse, the midwife, and my husband all apparently had this like look of panic, like, oh no, we've lost the heart rate. Like, the heart rate's been gone for a little bit. She's got to push this baby out. And I was like, I need a break. I'm starving. I'm out of energy. Like, he hadn't made any more progress. We could still see him crowning, but like, it wasn't like he was in the canal fully, or he was. It was, I just wanted like a minute to catch my breath. And they were like, you don't get a minute. You got to push right now. Like, so that was like the hardest part. And that was kind of right around the ring of fire. Like the ring of fire, I knew exactly when that was. But on that final push, I was so grateful to have like not only the nurse there, my midwife, my husband, who was a really great doula in the sense like he was there helping me through all the contractions, but they helped like hold my legs, I was on my back at this point, like that's where my body had landed up, and they helped get me in the right angle and like hold me through that last contraction, that last push, because that last one took some energy. I was beat at that point. But yeah, it was like 5 minutes of pushing and little man was out. And, they placed him right on my chest in his purpley blue little state. He came out stubborn as heck with his umbilical cord death gripped in his hand, and it was pressed against his cheek. And they were like, well, that's why we lost the heart rate, because little man was cutting off his own supply. He came to in like a minute or two and let out the cutest little cry. And it was just like this thank you, Jesus moment of like, he's here. We made it. Mom's safe, baby's safe. Like this scary thing at the VCI is no longer scary. Like we conquered that, you know, we kicked its butt. Yeah, it was great. And they let his cord pulse until it was white. Like it was snow white. It was fabulous. She showed it to me and she was like, it's pretty white. Would you like to cut it now? And I was like, yeah, we can cut the cord now. It was like 3 to 5 minutes after he was born by the time we cut it. And Dad cut the cord, and then the placenta came, and I'll have to send you a picture, Stephanie. You can share it with people if you'd like. It was actually crazy.
I was going to ask if you had a picture.
Oh yeah. My midwife she was like, I've never seen a cord like this before. She's like, I've seen marginal insertions before, but she's like, never one this bad. So it was humbling, scary, validating, like so many emotions to be like, okay, well, no one was lying to us. You know, no one was trying to fear monger us about how severe this condition was. And it validated like saying yes to some of those extra interventions that we're hopefully not going to have to do with this pregnancy. You know, like extra scans, monitoring, and induction. But definitely it was like, wow, like what could have changed in an instant if we didn't have a great team of providers, if we wouldn't have listened to our intuition. And then, you know, I said earlier, like I'm a woman of faith. So like God's protection over us and our pregnancy. It was really humbling, but also it was really funny. I don't think that's the right word, but that's what I'm going to use. My midwife was like, can we call in some additional doctors and nurses to look at this? She's like, I don't know if anyone's seen one before. So, you know, I'm in there with my baby and I'm like, yeah, just go like over there. Like you can go inspect it. And my husband actually put on gloves and was like playing with the placenta with the doctors and the nurses. They were holding it up and looking at how it was attached, the placenta to the cord. And yeah, I was kind of like, oh, that's my placenta. I grew that. Like I grew this little fun, weird science experiment, you know? But yeah, I do have a picture. I'll share it with you. So if you want to attach it to the show notes or whatever, I think if
definitely
you
do that. That's
geek out at birth, it's cool, but maybe look at it after you've given birth for all the moms who are listening, because not all placentas look like that.
That's awesome. Before we jump off, will you give us your best advice for moms and best advice for birth partners?
Yes.
From everything that you've learned.
So for moms, it's do enough research, but not too much that you feel confident. I think the best thing that I did for myself was educate, so that when I was faced with making a decision, no matter how big, no matter how small, I left that decision and I didn't second guess it. There's not one thing I would change about our birth plan, our birth decision, because I felt educated and prepared. Don't let anyone make you feel crazy. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't know your body or your baby, because you do. You don't need a PhD in medical terminology or anything like that to know what's best for you and your baby, and just be confident. And I really think, like, between the podcast and the course and all the other resources I brought in that we didn't even have time to talk about today, that was my biggest win. And for partners, trust the woman birthing your baby. You may not agree with where she wants to give birth or how she wants to, but be open to seeing it and support her to achieve her best birth. Because for some women, they'll do it 7 times, and for some women, they're going to do it once. And so don't use the excuse, honey, let's do it this way on this one and the next way on the other one. Trust her that she knows her body and how she can give birth, and really just encourage her, because women are amazing. Like, the entire time you're growing a human, you're birthing the human, and then afterwards you're taking care of the tiny human. You're incredible. So birth partners, trust her, and help her out in any way she can. And rub her feet. She deserves a foot rub.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you, Whitni. This has been awesome. I know that there are going to be other women out there looking for information on that specific concern with the cord insertion. And so I know that that's going to be great, along with induction, women that are looking for positive birth stories as far as induction goes, and just your positivity in general. Like, everything that you've said has just been so wonderful. So thank you for taking your time and sharing your birth story with us today.
Of course. Thank you, Stephanie, for everything you do, and for having us mamas on here to share these positive stories. I think it's really important that we can surround ourselves with them. Thank you so much, and best of luck continuing the podcast.
If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step, so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.